On today's show, what are the expectations for the Indiana Pacers fresh off of a trip to the Eastern Conference Finals, and how much better can Tyrese Haliburton and Pascal Siakam get as a star duo? It's all coming up on today's Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of different ticketing offers. And that's not the only great benefit that Game Time has. They have seat views, so you know exactly what the seat is going to look like at the venue that you're going to. They've got their lowest price guarantee, Game Time ticket coverage, and my personal favorite, all-in pricing. Look, they are so transparent with their all-in pricing tool. All you have to do is toggle it on, and then you see the price from start to finish. My least favorite thing is when you're buying tickets for any kind of a live event, whatever, and you go through the ticket buying process, and at the very, very end, they hit you with like the digital handling fees and the service charges and all these little surprise fees, and you wind up paying more in fees than you do for the actual tickets. That doesn't happen with Game Time. They've got their all-in pricing, fully transparent, so you know exactly how much you're paying from start to finish. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA. For $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Pacers, Tony East. You can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts, or on YouTube, just search Locked On Pacers here, because I think the Pacers are in a really interesting position going into this next season, Tony, coming off of an Eastern Conference Finals trip. However, how they got to the Eastern Conference Finals was a pretty, I won't say intense topic of discussion, but maybe under a little bit of scrutiny with the teams that the Pacers played along the way, right? No Giannis for the Bucks, and then a really beaten down New York Knicks team that they did take to 7 games and ultimately won in Game 7. They get credit for that, but let's start right there. Kind of what should the expectations be for this Pacers team going into a year where they are coming off an ECF run, but kind of, again, you take into account some of the teams that they played along the way. Was it a little bit of maybe fool's gold in there?
Yeah, they've talked about knowing that they can't just snap their fingers and be back there, right? And what makes it so fascinating for them is the way that every team in the East is trying to get better is different, right? Theirs is that they are good and young, and they're coming back with so many of the same players. In fact, they've only lost Doug McDermott and Jalen Smith from last year's team. Everybody else is back, right? Other teams changed their coaches or got good minimum guys or made huge moves in the case of Philly and New York. The Pacers are like, we have 41 extra games of Siakam, and we have a bunch of young guys. We think that'll be a better team. And so what that actually amounts to will be really interesting, because it's rare that a team that is as young as the Pacers gets to the conference finals that quick in their build, right? They even talked about it. They said, we had a plan and we hope to reach the conference finals within 3 years. And they did it the first year, right? So how do you respond to that? And how are expectations defined after that? It's fascinating, right? Because do you keep going with the plan? Do you change your plan to now be, hey, we're really good right now? That's kind of what they're trying to up against. But I think that they are clearly keeping some long-term vision going, while also understanding that, hey, we can win around. We have one of the best offenses the NBA's ever seen. We can make some noise.
You mentioned kind of obviously all the other moves that have been made. We're just taking a look right, at the Eastern Conference right now. We won't worry about the West or anything, but just, you see some of the big moves that have been made, the other, marginal improvements across the board. How much of a, I guess, talent gap does it feel like there is between this Pacers team, if any, between some of the other top teams at the East, right? Like you saw, obviously the Celtics and then the Knicks and the 76ers made their massive moves. Is there a talent gap, or do you view this as more just an experience gap for the Pacers, if anything?
Yeah, last year they were top 4 in point differential. I don't know if people actually care about what that means, but that does suggest that they were, a better team than a team that clinched the playoffs on the last day of the regular season. And like, the gap from 2 to 8 was 3 wins last year, right? The East is very close despite what people think, but I do think that Philly getting as good as they did and New York getting as good as they did probably puts them a tier above the Pacers. But any of this 4 through 8 gobbledygook of maybe Milwaukee's better, to be honest, but the Pacers have said, hey, we don't care how good Milwaukee is. We're just going to beat them every time we play them.
There you go. Yeah. So, I mean, it's one of those things where you look at history and history tells you, hey, well, maybe Indiana is like, I don't know, Milwaukee's kryptonite or whatever, but they've got something that the Bucks can't deal with. So do you rank, should the Pacers be ranked above the Bucks at this point?
Well, the Blazers swept the Pacers last year, so let's put Portland up there while we're doing this. But, where they rank in that 4 through 8 hierarchy is kind of flavor of the month, whatever you like about how teams change their structure or strategy in the offseason, coaching change, whatever. But I don't think, no one's in Boston's tier, but I think that the Knicks and Sixers have kind of separated from that group a bit. And then the Pacers are in that next bunch, trying to hope that they can, improve by a lot via the extra Siakam games and internal development they should have.
Okay, so so just to clarify really quick, so Celtics in their own tier, I think that's fair to say. Knicks, 76ers, and then you're putting the rest of the East kind of in its like a third tier after the 76ers and Knicks. So I think conventional wisdom would agree with you there. Maybe there's an argument that the Bucks are more like towards
can they be like
top.
Tier 2.5 or something?
That's fair, but then what would need to happen then this season, right? So just had the ECF appearance. What needs to happen for this Pacers team to then catch up to the Knicks or the 76ers possibly as soon as this season?
Yeah, having Siakam for extra half a year, that's probably 2-3 more wins in theory. But the Pacers were really healthy last year outside of course, their best player, which who knows how that balances. To me, it's all about the guys they already have and had in-house, right? They have last year in their playoff rotation alone, this doesn't even account for the rest of their roster, Tyrese Haliburton, Andrew Nembhard, Aaron Nesmith, Obi Toppin, Isaiah Jackson, Ben Shepherd, all in their first 4 years in the league, right? And that doesn't even account for Ben Mathurin. That doesn't account for Jarris Walker, right? And anyone they've recently acquired. So they're really young still. And so that's why I think they're so comfortable with a very similar team again, is because what are the odds that none of them are better, right? Like, obviously, growth, if growth in the NBA was just every year players get better and better, it'd be so much easier to project forward. So it's not easy to say that, but they, in this case, have so many young guys who could get better that it's almost impossible that none of them are better, right? And so that's the easiest way to see the Pacers moving up or being more of a contender than I'm currently saying is a lot of them are better, right? Andrew Nembhard and Ben Mathurin are much better. Aaron Nesmith continues to improve by quite a lot. Oh my gosh, Jarris Walker's playing all the time because he's, like any number of young guys could significantly change their fortunes this year. And so I think it's one or several of them stagnate, or this is what they are, and that's fine because they have a bunch of other ones who could improve and be better. And even Tyrese Haliburton's only 24, right? So I think that's the bet they're making. And if that doesn't happen or it doesn't happen to the extent they need, great, they have lots of trade chips to get better after that. But I think that's kind of what this year will look like, and there is a chance they could move up to that tier, but I think it'll be pretty tough. Those are some good teams.
I want to revisit Tyrese Haliburton and his age here in a second. That'll be our final.
I lied about his age just now, so we'll get there.
20, okay, well, we'll get there in just a moment. But I want to say, looking at kind of this team and going into this next season, obviously this past year they only had the half season to really kind of mesh, and those on the fly midseason trades are always really tough, especially when it's a star caliber player that you're adding in a Pascal Siakam type. So what does it feel like is kind of the next steps for Tyrese Haliburton and Pascal Siakam to kind of, elevate themselves or maximize themselves as a star duo in the NBA?
Took them a while to really get going too, because Siakam got to Indiana and then he played in Portland, and Haliburton returned that night from injury, but he shouldn't have. And he re-aggravated the injury and then didn't play for some number of games, and then was playing like half of games. Instead, it was so weird. So and then he wasn't as good. And so they never really played together at even like close to full strength until like late March. And thankfully they had just enough time to like, all right, the playoffs, no problem. We got this. But that is what I will be very interested in is what does that look like with the training camp? With the rest of their team. Like Siakam has a gym at his house, right? We just saw these videos on his Instagram feed of like half the Pacers roster down there training with him, right? What does that mean? What's that going to look like for the coming season? What is Siakam having at camp to know the Pacers terminology? You cover a team, like that's what everybody says is one of the hardest things about getting traded is even stuff that is the same, like defensive principles are the same. You call it something different, right?
Every team has different ways to call stuff out. And it's kind of crazy because it's all the same concepts, but when you're hearing it, because communication is such a key part of, understanding where your teammates are, how to move, who to cover, where, all that stuff. It's wild.
And the other Siakam thing is he was in one team, Toronto, his whole career, and they play defense, especially under Nick Nurse, a very certain, specific, unique way. And so his instincts are really baked into that. And so it took him a while. I remember the game in Orlando where you could kind of see him processing defense a little different. So I think the hope for that pairing is that Siakam is better with that extra time, and that if Haliburton's healthy from day one, they'll just look awesome. I mean, they already played off each other very well in the postseason, but if they can, just click right away again, I mean, they just play their strengths fit together so well. They can score from different parts of the floor. They can both be the ball handler in pick and roll situations. It's so dynamic already. If they aren't any better, which I don't know what that would look like, that'd be really hard to guard the Pacers, because they're already both incredibly good. They had the best offensive rating in a postseason ever, right? Like it's crazy how good they already could be.
Recently, there was a kind of an NBA Twitter poll conducted. Josh Eberly did it. You can track him down on Twitter at Josh Eberly for the top 25 under 25 players in the association. Tyrese Haliburton managed to somehow drop 5 spots down to number 9. He was at number 4 at this time last season, so going into this past campaign. Why do you think that, more, I guess, kind of general NBA fans or so are, I guess, maybe down on Tyrese Haliburton compared to where he was a year ago? Because I feel like when you look at top 25 under 25 players, I feel like he's got to be consensus top 5 for where he is as a player right now.
Yeah, he was just a top 15 player of all the players.
Yeah,
right?
So
He made all NBA.
How do you drop so far for the under 25 list? It doesn't make sense to me.
I always read those lists and think people really over-index on what players' peaks are, what they could be, and I get that. That's very exciting, but Tyrese Haliburton's good now, right? He's very good now. And so that's kind of what I think it is last year, everybody was like, wow, this kid was pretty good for the Pacers. He's going to be better this year. And then it happened, and everyone's like, okay, this is what he is. That's just how because I always look at those, I'm like, wow, that's a really high. I love Evan Mobley, to be clear, but I'm like, that's a really high spot for Evan Mobley. He is always the guy that I think is over, where it's so weird because I really like him. But and if he turns out to be the player he could be, that's the right spot. But Wemby is amazing. He's going to be first in 2 or 3 years. But right now he should not be more than 4th, maybe. I don't know. But either way, that's what I think it is there's just more of an establishment. And he had half a season playing hurt, where he was the 25th best player in the league, not the top 10 player. So I think it's just kind of that stuff, and the Team USA thing where he didn't play at all, hardly. It was just a lot of recent stuff that
some
takes away from
in there for sure. Yeah,
because do people forget from last October to early January, he was a top 5 to 10 player in the league. People would come to the end and be like, you think he's in the MVP conversation? I'd say, well, no, he's not. He's up there, but not that high. But it was is a thing that happened. So yeah, I think that is something that people who are down on the Pacers in general, I don't think they realize how good he is, right? He's just phenomenal. And I lied about his age, Jackson. He was born on February 29th, 2000. So he's actually 6 years old. So his potential is through the roof for these exercises.
Oh, man. Well, hey, so for more on Tyrese Haliburton, Pascal Siakam, how good the Pacers will be, whether or not they can build off their Eastern Conference Finals appearance, and the actual age of the Pacers star player, you can track him down over at Locked On Pacers. Tony, thanks for stopping by Locked On NBA with me.